Hey guys, Sean Bougie, surplusfundsriches.net. We're going to talk about the number one issue that's going to affect you in the next 3 to 10 years. And knowing what I'm about to tell you is going to make some people hundreds of thousands of dollars in the coming years. I'm going to tell you why. We're going to cover joint tenants with rights to survivorship, importance of the date of death, community property rights, and property and trust. The huge issue looming on the horizon right now is a tsunami of deaths coming up. Here's why. First, let's look at home ownership rates. Among the 65 to 74-year-olds, they have the highest home ownership rate is almost 80%. So the opportunity that it's going to be an older person, 65 to 74, is very high that loses their house in foreclosures. 56.9% of homeowners aged 30 to 34 have been in their homes 3 years or less. So the big number here is the 65 to 74-year-olds. Why is that important? This is from Center for Health Statistics. The average life expectancy is currently 76 years old. So a monstrous portion of the population that owns homes is about to die. Now, most of you guys are chasing airship and trying to call people and try to figure all that out. If you would just read the deed, you'd avoid all that. Real quick, I'm going to teach you how to look at a deed and tell if the person's dead without going any further. And then I'm going to teach you the Dragon Slayer, how to get around probate and estate issues just by reading the deed if there are certain things incorporated in that deed. First of all, if the deed, and a lot of the older deeds are handwritten, believe it or not, but if the deed that transferred the ownership to the owner who owned it at the time of the sale was recorded in 1960 or earlier, you pretty much, that person on the deed is dead. Just so you know. Why? They were probably 20 years old at the time. That would put it at 1940. 1940 is their birthday. It is now 2023. That's 83 years old. The average person lives 76 years. The chance that they went beyond that is slim to none. So if you see an older deed, or if you're in a registered deeds department that only recorded deeds back to, let's say, 1960, and there's another deed, but I can't get it. Yeah, it's older than 1960. The person's dead. That's just a given. Okay. Now, how do we get around this? How do we get past all the estate and probate issues? We read the deed. We're going to talk about joint tenants with the right to survivorship, the importance of the date of death with that, and community property states. And you guys are going to be blown away by this. First thing you need to know is in many states, joint tenants, if they got it, if it was transferred to John and Mary Smith as joint tenants in many states, that means joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Okay, what that means is that if one of the spouses died, it transferred to the other one at their death, at the death of the spouse. In a few states, this is really wild, simply having a deed with both names followed by married or husband and wife, North Carolina is one of these states, that establishes a joint tenants with the right to survivorship automatically. That's why we use attorneys, guys. You can ask the attorney in a situation like that, and they can answer it like that. The real wild one is community states. There's 9 of these guys. These states establish joint tenants with right to survivorship, even if the spouse wasn't listed on the deed. Okay, I'm going to get to that, but let's talk about joint tenants with right to survivorship first. So with joint tenants with right to survivorship, the number one factor is the date of death, guys. Here's an example. Barry and Elizabeth Hurley bought the home January 1st, 1998 as joint tenants with right to survivorship. You see a lot of that. Barry dies March the 1st, 2023. His ownership would transfer at that point. No need for estate, no need for probate. The deed said husband and wife. Literally, Elizabeth could walk down to the court with a death certificate and prove that she's the sole owner of the property, which means she'd be the sole owner of the surplus, right? Not so fast. With surplus, we look at the foreclosure date versus the date of death. So if the property was foreclosed on February 28th and Barry died March 1st, Barry's ownership hadn't passed at the time of the foreclosure to Elizabeth. So now that instance, we have to deal with heirship. She didn't have 100% of the property. That didn't happen yet. So Elizabeth can claim half the surplus, and the other half will be divided among heirs, probably some to her as well, because the rights of survivorship did not kick in until after the property was lost. So it didn't happen. The transfer of his portion to her didn't happen. Very important you understand that. Date of death is everything. If the property was foreclosed on March 2nd, Barry's ownership passed to Elizabeth the day before, when he died at his death. So Elizabeth, since it passed completely to her the day before the foreclosure, she gets all the surplus. You don't have to worry about probate or estate. Big deal. Now here's where it gets wacky. Let's talk about where the deed doesn't list a spouse, but in these states, if they were married, not divorced at the time of the foreclosure, that spouse, even if they're not on the deed, is entitled to all the surplus. Sound crazy? It's going to think about how much this is going to save you guys, right? So you find out the owner died, but then you also find out he was married, not divorced, at the time of the foreclosure, even though there's nobody else on the deed. In these 9 states, if you can prove he was married to someone else and that spouse is still alive, they're entitled to 100%. 100%. Let's look at it. These are your 9 golden states because it's community property law. Even if the spouse's name wasn't on the deed, they were married, not divorced at the time of the foreclosure, and the other person died prior to the foreclosure, right? The person on the deed died prior to the foreclosure, but they were married, and you can prove that. In these 9 states, the spouse, even not being on the deed, is entitled to the money. Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Washington State, Wisconsin, and Texas. This is a big deal, guys. Now, lastly, let's talk about property and trust. If the property is in a trust, not a person individually. See, you got to read the deed, guys. If the property is in a trust, not a person individually, the administrator of the trust is the person that's entitled to surplus. They'll figure out how to disperse it. As long as they're the administrator, they're entitled. Now, there's usually a backup administrator too. So if the administrator passed, there's usually a chain, someone else you can follow. Guys, I just made you guys hundreds of thousands of dollars in the next 3 to 10 years. You're welcome.